Just to check in, I'm being shown as present. This is David Dean.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know,
Nowhere?
but they work really well, so
Okay.
they're everywhere, I think. Yeah, it's.
All right.
This window back here too.
So this is Marty. Am I in okay?
Yes, yep, can hear you. All right, so it's 5 o'clock, everyone. Recording's going.
It is, yep.
All right, welcome everyone to the July 26th Fish and Wildlife Board meeting in Waterbury instead of Montpelier today. My name is Michael Bancroft. I'm the Orange County Board member, filling in as chair, as our regular chair, Brad Furland, is remote today. So before we get started, let's just go around and we'll start with the introductions of the board members here in the room, and then we'll move to online. So basically, we need Franklin County.
Allison Fraser, Chittenden County.
Franklin goes to grid that. Bob Patterson, Addison County.
Michael Bancroft, Orange County.
Brian Bailey, Washington County. Paul Llewellyn, Orleans County.
Neil Hogan, Bennington County.
And Brad, we'll start with you online.
Brad Furlan, Caledonia County.
David Dean, Wyndham County.
Martin Van Buren, Rutland County.
Thank you. And Commissioner, would you like to introduce yourself and your staff?
Sure. Good evening, I'm Fair, Commissioner of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I have a bunch of folks with me. Why don't we start with Lieutenant Major Fowler?
John Fowler, Major to the Warden Service.
Captain Destiny, General Counsel.
Justin Stedman, Colonel for the Warden Service.
Gail Conley, Principal Assistant to the Commissioner.
David Sauls, for the Program Manager.
The Saunders Project Coordinator. Mark Scott, Mayor Person.
Margaret Murphy, Fish Program Manager.
Ellie Thomas, Director of Outreach.
Everyone, all right, thank you. Okay, so here's on the agenda, approval of the previous meeting minutes for the May 24th meeting.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes.
So I give a second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? All right. It's approved. Moving on. So next is public comments. So we'll first start with folks here in the room and then move to anyone online who has a comment. So again, you have up to 2 minutes to talk about anything, whether it's something on the agenda tonight or anything else. It is not a back and forth, but you can ask questions, provide comments. Ally will be timing you and we'll ask you to stop speaking at 2 minutes. Again, this is being recorded, and even though we don't know where the microphones are, please speak clearly so that everyone can hear and so the recording can properly dictate what you're saying. So we don't have a list. We'll actually just go around the room, and if you'd like to speak, just raise your hand and I'll get started on this side of the room. All right, go ahead, and if you can stand up and microphones are, state your name and town of residence, please.
My name is Rick Reed. I live in Williston, Vermont.
I hunt, fish, and trap. I've submitted comments by email regarding the proposed traffic and file hunting regulations. I appreciate the opportunity to make an additional point now. Professional wildlife management makes all the difference. In my lifetime, I don't recall a period where our wildlife, pretty much across the board, has been in better shape. This has not always been true. Deer curve, for instance, was managed by the legislature for a while, with management strongly influenced by political and socially driven considerations. The end result was widely viewed as a disaster for the deer, habitat, and the public. It was professional wildlife management based upon data and science that turned things around. We're fortunate in Vermont to have a talented, dedicated team of state scientists whose mission is to ensure the good health and well-being of our fish and wildlife to the benefit of all stakeholders. I encourage the department and the board to continue to manage our wild resources based upon data and science, not politics or socially driven considerations. The responsible stewardship of our wildlife is too important otherwise. Thank you for the opportunity to express that.
Thank you. And David Dean, could you hear that okay?
I did, sir. I was just wondering if they could stand sort of behind you. The screen is very limited in terms of what it shows, and it's really just the head table there.
Yeah, okay, I see him.
Thank you.
Any other public comments? Right. So if you could, please come up here so you're in camera view. And please state your name and town of residence, please.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Larry Martin, Worcester, Vermont. For the proposed regulations concerning traffic, 4.5 foot oval traffic on my end must, A, at base plates that feature a center chain mount for swivel with free moving chain, and at least one additional swivel that allows for ability to be captured animal. I believe that should be 2 additional swivels. B, be anchored with a maximum of 18 inches of chain length. This should be amended to read, be anchored with a maximum of 18 inches of chain and a minimum of 12 inches of chain. Reason being, coyotes are long legged, chain too short, it gives an opportunity to pump the stake. C, it should read, be padded, offset, laminated, or have a jaw thickness of 5/15 to an inch, or fully encapsulated. D, have a spread of no more than 6 1/4 inches. I think that's a good measurement. D, if a foothold trap is triggered for downward pressure, it must be adjustable for pan tension. Another good idea. F, notwithstanding section 4.5, the drive may be used to anchor foothold trap divided into trap meets subsection A, C, D, and E. That is how that should be. 4.7, no meat-based baited body looking traps will be set on the ground and placed in an anchored enclosure with openings no greater than 60 inches, or the trap trigger that be set at least 12 inches from all openings. That is how it should be voted on. This allows the trap to use body looking traps for fine sets without the use of meat-based bait. It's very beneficial for raptors and beaver in particular. Not only is it the most effective means of capture for these animals, most humane, and a 25-inch square trap doesn't get it down. Trail setback, as long as the trap is allowed to set trap in a culvert or in the water, it really doesn't matter if the setback is 25 feet or 50 feet.
Thank you. 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, anyone else in the room? All right.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Rod Cornaro, from the town of Orange, and I also represent the Vermont Wildlife Patrol. There's a question regarding the DMPs that I've been asking the department for a couple months now. I continue to not get the answer on it. It relates to a study that I presented both to the fur bearer director back in May and also David Sauceville, since then Mark Scott, and it has to deal with a published paper On evaluation of mechanically improved concrete traps to shoot and kill fish in simulated natural environments. And I'll read the abstract because I'm pretty much is telling what the issue is. Because the abstract reads, mechanically improved Conaver 220 traps fail to render irreversibly unconscious in 3 minutes or less. Fish are single struck in the head, neck region, or double struck in the neck and thorax region. Although the Conaver 220 trap is often recommended as an alternative to the steel leg bolt trap, it is unlikely that it has the potential to humanely kill fish. So my issue is that why then is the 220 Conaver trap included in the BMPs that are being presented to the legislature? And of course, the directive of the BMPs is to reduce suffering in animals shot in traps. So that's a big discrepancy that kills any hope that I have that this is actually got to reduce suffering in fishers, especially. There's also been reports recently in 2022 of fishers being trapped. They've been walking around the snowmobile trails with the traps on their head. That reinforces the scientifically published paper. I agree that these decisions should be based not on emotion or politics, but on science. And here's the science. So I'm still waiting for that answer on why this was approved to be able to keep trap. Thank you.
Thank you. So 2 housekeeping things. So if you're online and not with the staff, department staff on the board, please turn your camera off because you are the biggest face in the room. Please, while we're, please keep chatter to the minimum. The recording does pick up a lot of side chatter in the recording. So Brian online, can you turn your camera off, please? Thank you. All right, anyone else here in this room? All right.
I'm going to start by saying I'm going to take a much broader perspective. I'm not discussing 2 minutes worth. Or you're talking about Canada, Canis, Latchans, Bar, or Oriens. I've studied this animal for 30 years at least. It's absolutely an amazing animal, resourceful, adaptable, incredibly intelligent. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's a evolutionary masterpiece. But the fact is, it's not from here. This is a consideration everybody should take into account. It just lives here like most Vermont residents do now. We left doors open hundreds of years ago by our predecessors. Just like we did on Champlain, we allow species on Champlain like the sea lamprey and the zebra mussels and the sea lice and the green goby pass through big mistakes. And we did so when we wiped out the bulls, the catamount, and the lynx. Doors were opened to the species that I would consider, as I would also consider lampreys and others mentioned, invasive species. They started showing up in the 60s, 70s as our habitat improved for all wildlife. And to think for a minute that there aren't correlations with the increase in coyote productivity and inhabitants within the state, as far as things like partridge numbers, woodcock numbers, snowflake hare numbers, would be kind of naive, I think, because the lines are there in history and in knowledge.
2 minutes. And
Already?
can you please state your name?
My name is John. Probably don't say John.
Thank you very much.
These limitations, I feel.
No, you gotta be fair to everyone else. Thanks. All right, anyone else here in the room? Public comment? All right, so now we'll go online. If you have a public comment, please raise your hand. And Ally will ask you to unmute or unmute you, and you'll have 2 minutes. So we'll start with Brian.
Ryan, remember to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. I should know better. Should I turn my camera on, or you don't want it on?
Now, just start with your name and town of residence, please.
Well, I'm a businessman in Bennington County. Brian O'Gorman is my name, and I've spoken here before. You want me to spell my name?
Nope, we're good.
Okay, thank you, thank you. I was just wondering about two things. The 18-inch chain, just with the traps there, and with the 25-foot setback. Does that add on to the 25-foot? Is it 25 foot plus 18 inches? And I was just wondering how that works. And it seemed kind of absurd. You're at the 43rd Infantry Division Highway, and people are driving 50 miles an hour down the road. Why anybody would walk on their dog there to get trapped? But then I have another question. Maybe one of you folks can answer it about the wild turkey survey that's been going on. Is that published somewhere? Does anybody know about that? The findings of that survey? So thanks for listening to me.
Thank you. Anyone else online?
There is a phone number, so if 802-760-9032 would like to speak, you're already unmuted. You can start. Okay.
All right. Anyone else online like to speak? That's it. Thank you very much. All right, so now we'll turn it over to the commissioner for the revision to the bait fish litigation.
As you know, you voted on this, and it went to my car, came back, and so this is your final vote. So I'm gonna ask Margaret to come up.
Thank you, Commissioner. Hello, everybody. Third vote, it's always a charm, right? We also have our online, our issues.
Yeah, I think
In front there, certainly.
Thank you.
Yep. How's that? Perfect. All right, you guys want to see me online. So Eric Palmer, our fish division director, is also online. We're here to run the third vote to big fish regulations. Reminder that they're pretty minor changes that we've made to the regulations. Went to Elcar June 29th. We met with Elcar. Third, minor comments, more questions on our big fish regulations and what they're useful for or not. So just explain that it's trying to balance that risk of limiting the potential for invasive species to come in through bait, and then providing opportunity for better fishing opportunities. A lot of people do like to use bait fish, particularly through winter ice fishing. So explain that to them. There was one minor technical change that they asked that we stop using the word regulation and call it a rule. So in the final version of 141, wherever it talks about the regulations, it is changed to rule. And we can get your copy of that. I neglected to do that and realized this morning that I'm not sure all of you have seen that. It's everything else is the same, just wherever it says regulation, it will now say rule. Minor change, so it doesn't affect the rule at all. It's just the terminology change. And if we want the legal aspect of that, if anybody has questions, Catherine can fill us in, because I'm not exactly sure of that terminology and why one is better than the other. So that was the only small minor technical change, but the rest just passed with Elcar as you voted on for first and second vote. And I will entertain any questions you have.
That means word regulation and hunting or trapping, all in regulations. What, like, I don't know.
I'm gonna ask our legal experts.
You know, from its plain ordinary meaning, rule and regulation, it has the same, essentially the same meaning. But the Vermont Administrative Procedures Statute, which is what sort of dictates what the rulemaking process is, consistently uses the name rule. So I think what legislative council is trying to do when they make these kinds of comments is to just, every time somebody comes in with a new rule or a rule amendment, and they're using the word regulation, they're asking them to change it to rule because it's more consistent with statutory language. It's not going to affect the enforceability of existing regulations, but the next time we go in and make changes to something that's called a regulation, we're going to be changing the term from regulation to rule.
So we will be doing that for all the other.
We will. Yeah,
Right, thank you.
yeah. you're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, now do we have a motion? Oh,
I'd like to make a motion to approve the release of data fish.
second. Is that a clear enough motion?
That's the one.
Was that a clear enough motion? Yeah.
Easy?
Was this a clear enough motion? Can you restate your motion?
I made a motion, Catherine, to approve the regulations to the bait fish rule.
The amendments of the rule.
As approved by all.
Okay, say that. It's approved by Elkhart.
That's so.
Okay.
You second.
You approve?
Yeah. You have the list, so I'll do. All right, we're gonna go by roll call. So we'll first start with me, yes. Brian Bailey? Yes. Nick Burnham?
Yes.
David Dean?
Yes,
Amy Dragon?
Yes.
Brad Ferlin?
Yes.
Allison Frazier?
Yes.
Neil Hogan?
Yes.
Mike Olson? Brian McCarthy?
Yes.
Paul Noel?
Yes.
Bob Patterson?
Yes.
Jay Sweeney?
Yes.
Marty Van Buren?
Yes.
So 13 yeses. All right,
Thank you.
thanks very much. Okay. I'm doing on time. All right, we're cooking. The pizza's here at 6. So next on the agenda, number 4, amendments to the fur bearer species rules, second vote. So Commissioner, I will hand it to you.
Mark, you want to introduce this? Absolutely. So, always coming up. There are some variations on voted on. These are purely recommendations from the department. That, Mark?
Thank you, Commissioner. Good evening, everybody. It's nice to see folks there. So bear with me a little bit. I not like to sit here and just read some text, but some of this I think is important. What I want to do is just a couple of minutes to set the stage for you, or you take important action tonight in the second vote of this fur bear rule to do this tonight. So this is old news to some of you, but I think it's worth that we all listen to it again and think about it. For Act 159, Trapping Best Management Practices went into effect July 1, 2022. Required the department develop, in this case, rules, it calls regulations, that would improve the safety of trapping and the welfare of trapped animals. it also, when you look at that legislation, refer to Act was best management practices. For Act 165, hunting coyotes with the aid of dogs, effective July 1, 2022, required the department to develop regulations for the hunting of coyotes with the use of dogs. Significant is a moratorium of hunting coyotes with the aid of dogs exists until the board enacts such regulation. It's adopted through the process. That's important. As per Act 159, that's the tracking, EMP. The overall objective of this year-long effort on behalf of the department, working with the board, has been to modernize tracking practices to improve animal welfare and selectivity. 2022 legislature charged the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife with implementing BMPs for tracking based on the decades-long scientific research conducted by the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, sometimes known as AFWA. It was not intended, this has been repeated several times from the commissioner on down through, to be a referendum on tracking, directed the department to, quote, recommend best management practices for tracking that propose criteria and equipment designed to modernize tracking and improve the welfare of animals subject to tracking programs. End of quote. The department and you folks, the board, conducted, in my opinion, and the departments and all of our staff, a fair, transparent, and inclusive process dedicated to finding common ground on an issue we know that is very polarizing. Why? To improve tracking systems for animal welfare and selectivity. The department relied heavily on the results of that 23-year international research effort while maintaining practicality and making sure what we had instituted on the ground can be enforced by our law enforcement people. Thus, they were an integral part of the entire process from day one in the department. As per Act 165, the coyote hunting with dogs, the objective was to develop new regulations for the hunting of coyotes with the aid of dogs. I've heard often that coyote hunting is not regulated. That's not true. It is regulated. You need a license. You can only hunt so many. You can't hunt near a road. You can't hunt in certain conditions like that. So, however, no regulations currently existed on the specific activity pertaining to using dogs. The template that we used on to start the rule, working with you, was based off existing regulations that we worked with the board to develop hunting bears with the aid of dogs. And I remind people that maybe we're here at that time, but that took us about 3 years to get there. To working with the Bear Hound Association primarily, but anyone who hunted bears and had an interest. After the board's first vote on the department's recommendation, the department revisited the language of that regulatory adoption that you made, make sure it covered legislative intent of Act 159, the BMPs for trapping, as well as Act 165 that dealt with hunting coyotes with the aid of dogs. We developed additional recommendations beyond those covered within your first vote. And we also made sure that those were announced to the public. So when we held a public process, they knew what you voted on and adopted as your first set of regulations. They also knew that the department was going to propose some additional regulations to you, just proposals from our perspective. The responsive document that we provided to you contained all the comments and responses that cover recommendations from the board's first vote and recommendations the department developed prior to having the public hearings. We undertook a variety of measures to ensure that the public was made aware of the proposed rule changes, provided, in our opinion, plenty of opportunity to participate in the rulemaking process. We issued press releases like we always do. We did some work on social media, and we held an open public comment period. We had 3 hearings, board hearings, that we did the work on your behalf. There were Rutland, Montpelier, and one was done virtual, all in June. We talked with several media outlets, including WCX and Vermont Public Radio. Table outlining the legislative directives, the board's proposal, and the department's additional recommendations were made available on our website, as well as we presented them at the hearings. Recordings of all the public hearings are available on our website, in addition to the breakout group focused questions. The department also received comments through email. We had a period, basically, the formal period was May 15th to June 30th. I think we got some after that, but we included them in, to do that. I'd like to highlight once again, the openness of the process that officially began the passage of those acts, July 1, 2022. We had working groups. Some of you were involved with that. We had a working group on tracking best management practices that met 4 times in August and September last year. I want to recognize both Mike Colson and Marty Van Buren, who stepped up to represent the board interest at those 4 meetings that we had. I also want to acknowledge that David Dean also attended virtually some of those meetings, so he was aware that was going on. We also held a coyote hunting with the aid of dogs working group. We met one time with a facilitator in January, and both David Robillard, who I realize he's not on the board now, but Jamie, you were also part of that working group with us. We also, as required by legislation, held a public hearing on November 29th. That was done at the White River High School in South Royalton. We also, on the same topic, conducted a statewide scientific survey of the public in the fall of 2022. The title was Vermont Residents' Attitudes Towards Fur Bear Management. I think we've shared that all with you. It's something that I hope you continually go back to. I know I find myself going back to those surveys over and over, as does the staff, to try to continue pushing wildlife management with the interest of all Vermonters. The public hearings, I was pleased that I think almost all the board members made one, there might be an exception or 2, whether it was the 2 in person or the virtual ones. I also witnessed, I was able to attend all of them, as was many of our staff, including our law enforcement people too. What I did observe was the board members making an earnest effort to get around and listen to people at the breakout tables that they were in, as well as afterwards. So thank you, board members, for doing that. That was important. It needs to be emphasized. Rutland, we had 53 people that signed in. Montpelier, we had close to 70 people. We did notice some people, when they come to meetings, they're not going to sign in. I think it's the government. I'm not going to give my name. I don't know what the reason is. I can joke about the date, but we do know exactly how many people signed in. We also know during that period that they came from different places all over the state. The virtual meeting, we did notice it was interesting, people going in and out of the meeting to do that. So we know at one point we had about 50 people. We could tell by people that were tuned in to that, as well as some board members that were tuning into those. The public comment period, I told you already that we had. Let me give you a quick summary of all the comments that were received into the board. Every comment we got, we scanned. You should have every single comment that came that was reported at a public hearing that we had, including any email that came in. Emails were huge, 1,129 that we had. We knew probably there was 123 from that were duplicates from the same address, but maybe sent in at a different time. I know I'm guilty doing this. I think I sent an email and somehow it that hit me and I might send it again, but we had clearly 110 were from out of state origins. Not that it matters. There may have been more. We didn't really go hunting to sort that through, nor do we have the means. There was 179 that came in that really were undeterminable as far as the origin. That's the trick of getting that information. You go to a public hearing, we ask people, so we know where they're coming from. There. 712 where we knew for sure from Vermont origins. This is interesting, and of all my work done on public rules, I never have experienced this wide diversity. 128 Vermont towns. 38 different states and 18 countries were involved. Sending, that's, I had to do a pause when I read that, to saying that, so. Those were from the email comments. Public hearings, 67 times. That's impressive. People made an effort to attend those hearings in 2 different states, predominantly Vermont and Florida. So when I stand before you, and I think we have been anything but responsive and tried to be fair, inclusive of everybody in this process. This is a complicated challenge to do that. It's a practice that many of us don't experience firsthand to do this. Unfortunately, there are a few board members that have that on the ground, hands-on experience, as does our staff. So tonight, I'd like to also make sure that when or if it's appropriate, David Sosmo can speak if he needs to, our program manager, Chris Saunders, who did some of the work behind the scenes, especially in the hunting and coyotes, but also on tracking. Obviously, our major and director of law enforcement, Colonel, that this question to them. Sean, actually, to his credit, was heavily involved in the entire process on both to do that. And our fur bear biologist, Bree, and of course, Kim Royer, who has more expertise than any of us combined when it comes to best management practices on trapping to do that. So we're here tonight. Catherine's going to walk you through, like she did on your first vote, on language of the rule. She's going to highlight what was done on the first vote, but highlight some of the, what I call housekeeping changes that we made. Clarity in language, not changing content. And then after that, it's important that she walks you through the department's proposed changes, as we noted, that we felt were significant to meeting the intent of the both acts passed by legislature. And then afterwards, I'm hoping to get a second vote here done tonight. That's our goal. That's why we're here on this department. Then Catherine, perhaps you can walk through the next steps from Elkhart to them. So if not any questions, I'd like to turn it over to Catherine. And what I would ask, it would help us if you do get questions, you can address them to the chair, obviously with Catherine language, and then the commissioner can sort through, because some of these are policy questions, some are very technical and science. So, okay, thank you.
Good evening.
Gail's gonna project it.
Okay,
So just please.
before I start, I wanted to ask the board if you want me to focus on the department's additional proposals, or do you want me to start from the beginning and walk through all of the language, including the language that you previously voted on? I want to do what's most helpful to you.
What does everyone think? I feel like knowing what we originally voted on, starting with that, and then looking at
Okay.
the department recommendations.
So I think you all have copies of the original, you all have copies of the draft rule in front of you. And there's a copy that has yellow highlighted sections. And there is a yellow highlighted section on the first page. So if you'll all just sort of focus on that document, I think I can start walking you through the document from there. So under section 44, fur bearing rules, the first change that the board voted on was in 1.3. And essentially it says this rule shall apply to all persons who take or attempt to take fur bearing animals. And it used to say trapping or hunting. And that was changed to any method. And that was something that you approved during the last, at the last vote. Under the definitions, which is in section 3, you voted to include definitions of accompany and bait. And if you have any questions about that, I think we're happy to talk about those. Those definitions are very similar, if not exactly the same, as the definitions that are in the bear rule. One minor change that we're recommending is to change the term hounds to the 8 of dogs, just to make it consistent with the rest of the language in the rule. And that's in 1.1. And that's highlighted in yellow. I don't think that's a substantive change, but we are recommending it nonetheless. On page 2, you also voted to define control of dogs to include the aid of GPS collars with a track log and training and control functions. And there we're making a minor change that just says control of dogs. There was a slash dogs with the parentheses, and it's not necessarily consistent with all the language throughout the rule. So we're just trying to make it consistent throughout the rule. Not a substantive change. There was also a definition of coyote dog permit, which is a permit that's issued by the commissioner to a person who wishes to hunt or pursue coyotes. It's required by statute. And there's also a new definition for a department registered dog. And that also is very consistent with the bear hound rule, where you have to register your dog when you hunt a bear, and in this case, a coyote. One of the new definitions that the department is recommending is a definition of something called a legal trail. So a legal trail is a public right-of-way that's defined by statute. Title 19 is the section of the statute that talks about highways and town highways. And legal trails are specifically mapped by the Agency of Transportation. They are designated by towns, and they could be a previously designated highway that they've thrown up, or it could be a new public right-of-way that's laid out as a trail. And the reason why we put that in there is because we added it to the setback section, which is in 4.15. I will get to that later, but you have a question?
Yeah, so how does this legal trail definition, how's that compared to the original definition from last meeting?
There was no definition of legal trail. There was a definition of a public trail, which we have left in there. This is an additional trail that's been added to the setbacks. It's a legal town trail, if you will. We also defined public trail a little further down here in 3.14. This is something that you already voted on, and it is a public trail for the purposes of a pedestrian footpath that's owned by a state agency, designated and mapped. Part of the reason why we're being so specific is that there's lots of trails all over Vermont, right? But many of them are not well defined. I go walking in the woods all the time. A lot of the trails that I walk on are not public trails. But we really wanted these to be mapped and well-defined, where you can, go on a website and see exactly where they are.
I have a question.
Sure.
So on the public trail, that would apply to the long trail?
A public trail would not apply to the long trail unless it was on state-owned land. Not all of the long trail is on state-owned land.
Right.
And it was specifically designated and mapped by the managing agency. So Forest Parks and Recreation has some land that is transected by the Long Trail, and they have designated that trail. So yes, parts of the Long Trail would be, would be covered by that. But if it's on private land, it's not covered by that. Private landowners have the authority to tell trappers, that they can't trap there. Trappers have to come to the landowner and ask for permission. So we're not looking to restrict landowners' rights to, allow trappers to trap on the land.
One of the public comments was relative to the fast trail, which goes through both private and public.
Yeah. And some vast trails are going to be mapped on, V-Trans, because they are designated rights of way, town rights of way. So for example, in my town, I know there's at least, there are some sections of the vast trail that go through town rights of way, and they are mapped on the V-Trans maps. But there are other sections that don't. They are part of the, they go through private land, and they're part of a network of private land connection.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So to clarify, you have permission to trap on private land, and the Long Trail crosses that private lanes. The setback rule does not apply to that.
It will not apply if it's not mapped. Yeah,
Is that same as the vast trail if it's on private land?
yes,
The setback rule will not apply, you have permission to trap, but
yeah.
you don't have to abide by the setback.
What you have to remember, though, is that there are, legal trails and town highways that do transect private land. So you'll see a little bit later when we talk about setbacks, we are recommending a change to allow trappers to trap on their own land, regardless of what, the designation is. So, I know it's a little confusing, but what we're really trying to do is to make it really clear that you've got to look at that map. And it's you've got, it's enforceable, it's clear where that trail is or where that public highway is.
And I assume the Bassett Trail would be the same as
Yeah.
the Long Trail or that Bassett
Yeah.
Trail on private land.
Yeah, you're gonna have some that may be part of, a class 4 town road or a legal trail. But you're gonna have some that are on private land and they're not mapped, they're not part of that system. So. So let's see, yes,
What about US Forest Service plan? Because I think the Long Trail, Appalachian Trail, traverse US Forest Service, state of Vermont lands and private lands.
we have not specifically. In here, we have not specifically said that trails on US Forest Service land are required to have setbacks. I suspect, and I know that there are probably some town roads that go through US Forest Service lands, so those would be applicable. But those would also be on the town maps that I was referring to.
And
Those-
US Forest Service roadways.
No, we have not designated those as being, yeah. Those, they have the authority to decide how they want to handle this, so we're leaving it to them. All right, so, legal trail. We were on pack of dogs. So this was something that the board previously voted on, pack of dogs, up to 4 dogs. We also voted on public highway, the definition of public highway, which is also in Title 19 of the statute. And here, we are recommending really a minor, amendment, which adds town and state highways, just to make it clear that it's both. Public trail for the purposes, I think we've already discussed that. We defined relaying because later on in the rule, we prohibit relaying. You also voted on the definition of taking coyote with the aid of dogs and what that means. And you voted on the training or control, a definition of the training control policy, as well as the sub-permittee. And then I think the next one was an unregistered dog, which is just a dog that doesn't have a tag or a registration with the department. And we're on to the restrictions.
Are coyote registration, bear registration, would be different?
They're similar.
They're similar, but-
The language was taken primarily from the bear pound rule. The differences are really more about the number of dogs.
Right, but I mean, the actual registration, whatever, you're asking if it's transferable?
Oh, no,
No.
No.
It's one or the other. Or both. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the restrictions, person trapping further animals under this rule has to check their trap, daily. We changed, these are all 4.1 through 4.4 are already in the rule. We simply changed the language his or her to their, minor change. And then the most significant change was under 4.5, where we set forth BMPs for foothold traps. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so while you're updating his and her there, are you gonna update the legal trail to laid out as a trail by the select board instead of select man?
Oh, sure. Well, we can. You're the board, right? You can make that suggestion. Let me just make a note to myself so I don't lose track of mine. Okay. All right. Under 4.5, which has to do with all foothold traps set on land. Under A, we did suggest a change that would add at least 2 additional swivels instead of 1. So that's under A. And then under B.
There was a, during this stuff material sent to us, that there were questions somebody had at hearings and it said, it asked if it's swivel. And swivels that, a double-sided swivel that's, both sides, does that count as 1 or 2? And I believe your answer was 2.
Yes.
I don't know, I think most so far. By the way, I got a bunch of stuff in my truck, if traps and accessories I brought in case anybody wanted visuals on any of this discussion. But, so that means like so-called crunch-proof swivel that is the most common, has 2 J hooks on either side to attach, like within the chain or would drag into your trap itself. So that would count as One of those counts as two. I don't,
I would rely on law enforcement to have that conversation with you.
I think generally speaking, the traffic was considered on one swivel, but you want to call it two, I don't know, what, at this time, for your purposes, two, it should be clear. You know what I'm saying? But I'm pretty clear with it being two. Into one of those bubbles. That just means you just basically, well, one of those counts as two then.
Okay. The way this was written, you'd have to have at least 3 swivels, correct?
Correct. One at the base. And two on.
That one at the base. Has two J hooks, one attached to the trap, and one attached to the chain, and that's considered two right there. You by your definition, but. I don't know. Swivels at both ends. I'm trying to be thick here, but I don't know. Anybody else? I can bring you a swivel during break and show you what I'm talking about.
That would be helpful to me. I don't know what you're talking about.
I think that's basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Paul, a clarification, you're not being picky. This is important. That you understand exactly what the regulatory change to do as well last year. All other members here at the meeting. Do you want me to bring in that stuff then?
Yeah, I think it's very much.
Okay.
I suggest that we clarify as to what types of swivels and where.
I would save that. What I'd like to do is to walk through all of the changes first. And then, but you can, obviously. And then I think that it might make sense to take, to vote on all the kind of minor changes first as as one, and then vote on certain sections. All foothold traps on the, and then, body gripping, so that you're all sort of in this, and then, the setbacks, so that it's really clear that what you're voting on, and you can really focus on those discussions. That makes sense.
Brad does have his hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, just a quick question. I want to make sure I understand the process. Is the point here to explain, well, first of all, to identify all the changes that department is recommending, but secondly, also to give us an explanation as to why the change is being made? I haven't caught yet in this explanation why we need to go from 1 to 2. I mean, just if you could just break it down to something that simple, tell us why you have to go from 1 swivel to 2 swivels. That would be very helpful.
You can talk about what, your question is why we need swivels or more than one?
No, why the change from at least 1 to at least 2 additional? The incremental change from 1 to 2, and why the change from our first vote to the second vote? What prompted that change to add that different requirement than the original one we voted on?
Kim, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I think we chose to change it because in the BMP, they recommended that there be at least 2. In addition to it wasn't that clearly stated, if I recall, but they recommended at least 2. And if you look at, like, for Fox and Coyote, most of them had 2 or 3 swivels, at least 2 or 3 swivels. So we tried very hard to follow the general recommendations of the best management practices and the research that was done. And we felt that the addition of another swivel actually more closely represented what had been tested and passed.
Did you hear all that, Brad?
Yes, and that was very helpful. That was very good information. So if that is part of the basis of any of these other changes moving forward, I think it's just good to add that perspective to the discussion.
Makes sense.
There are a number of other comments supporting that as well.
Moving on to B, be anchored with a maximum of 18-inch chain between the base plate and the start of the anchoring system. Extra swivels or shock springs can be added to the chaining system, but the additions cannot cause the chain to exceed 18 inches in length. I believe that this was added in part because we thought that the yellow highlighted language would make it a little bit clearer exactly what we want or exactly what is required by the rule. And I know that there were some comments about a minimum of a 12-inch chain, but I believe that there were lots of BMP traps that were approved that did not have a minimum, and I can let the real experts talk about that.
Right, when we check, I'll just stand up so you can hear me. When we checked the Coyote and the Red Fox BMPs, they used many different chaining systems for different foothold trap tests, but they ranged in size from 6 inches to 18 inches for Eastern Coyote. Most of them were between 9 inches and 18 inches, but still less than the 12-inch minimum that had been proposed. And the Red Fox ranged in length from 6 inches to 12 inches, so 18 inches also, but most were 6 and 9.5 inches, a couple of 7.5, 1 7.5, 1 12 inch. So we opted to, and we thought it would give more flexibility to folks to actually not put the minimum in there, especially given that it seems like many of these systems pass with shorter chain lengths.
I just want to say, I think the original proposal was a 12-inch minimum, an 18-inch max. And the reason for that, and I'll show you that, and I have the trap in my hand, but you got a state trap. Use Coyote as an example. The state goes down to the ground. Your chain is going to be, you want a length of chain at least 12 inches, so the animal is pulling perpendicular on that stake, not be able to pull vertically on it. And with a Coyote, with their length of leg and their strength, they more, if you have a short chain, you're more likely to pull that stake. And you don't want it too long, so they can get a head start and start lunging and pulling against much of a head start that can damage their paw or cause a pull out. So I think there's a happy medium there that creates the best case humaneness for that trapped animal, and I support a 12-inch minimum along with the 18-inch max. It may not be BMP, everything is not BMP approved. There's a lot of details in trapping that BMP will never even address, but they're still good ideas and they still increase the humaneness of the trapping systems.
You're basically saying that the length of the chain varies based on the size of the animal that you're trapping.
No, you wouldn't, not to that, but say land, just all land traps. Whether it's a coon or a coyote or a fox, that would still apply. But I use coyote as an example because they're more likely, if the chain is too short, they have the strength and the long legs to pull that stake. And that's, you don't want that to happen.
Oh, but too short, I mean, like 6 inches.
I'd say 6 inches is way too short for a coyote stake. Yeah. And any animal would benefit from that. Yeah.
Well, could you even have 2 or 3 swivels on 6-inch chain?
Well, it would be, yeah.
So you'd have that, I mean, just putting that on right there is gonna give you some length, and I agree with you, I support it.
I believe Brad has his hand up.
Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, just a quick question, make sure I understand this. The BMP recommends a maximum length of 18 inches, and that's it. What I'm hearing individuals proposing or discussing is the benefit of also adding a minimum, which, if I'm understanding, and the reasons why, which I've just articulated, but it sounds to me like adding a minimum is exceeding the BMP, unless there's a downside to having a minimum. But if there isn't a downside to having a minimum, it sounds like even some trappers I've heard would support a 12-inch minimum. So again, I think it sounds like that recommendation exceeds the BMP requirement, if I'm understanding this correctly.
I guess I would say that the research doesn't suggest that 12 inches is any better than 7 inches. There were traffic systems that passed that used the 7-inch chain, or that used a 9.5-inch chain. So they passed. So the question is whether or not there's any benefit from just restricting it to a 12-inch chain. There's no scientific evidence of that, but there may be practical reasons why people might.
But are there any evidence that that would be detrimental to have a 12-inch? No. You don't know.
Right, but there were systems with 12-inch chains that passed, and systems with 7-inch chains that passed, and systems with 9.5-inch chains that passed. So there's no clear evidence either way. Right.
So it seems like having a 12-inch minimum or any minimums more of a social issue rather than a scientific issue.
I don't call it social. Anybody traps long enough, they know darn about what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I don't
Well,
think
right,
it's a
that's-
social issue as much as like
That's
being in the field and knowing what you're doing.
When I say social, I just mean general understanding.
Just
I guess I side with if we don't define it, then if trappers have then it gives the trapper the ability to assess the situation and what their target species. Whereas if we define it, it may, negatively have negative consequences on someone's trap that actually passed to.
All right, are we ready to move to the next one, or do we have any more questions?
Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, my only question
I
was,
think Brad's hand is up again.
Oh, we got Frank.
Go ahead.
I mean, right now, we're just discussing code changes by the department. We are not gonna make any changes until afterwards.
Correct.
So should we just listen to the changes and ask questions and then?
I think it makes sense to ask questions and have the discussion. Then it gives you a little time to think about this stuff. But, then we'll do our vote.
Brad, do you have another question?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't. I gotta lower my hand. Thanks.
All right. So you also voted on the language that the foothold traps must be padded, offset, or laminated, or have a minimum job thickness of 5/16 of an inch, or fully encapsulate the foot. And we did add a couple of commas in here so that it would read be padded, offset, laminated, or have a minimum jaw thickness of 5/16 of an inch, or fully encapsulate the foot and have a pull trigger.
Has pull trigger been anywhere in this process?
No.
I feel like it's a new term.
Yeah, me too. I don't know what the
That's- That refers to they often called dog tooth traps, where you fully encapsulated trap. It's, I forgot to bring one of those, but, the cylinder that's staked into the ground as opposed to regular trap, you step on a pane and the jaws come off. Cylinders staked into the ground, and it's rather small cylinder, I don't know what they are, 3 inch diameter or less. They work well on, like for a crew because they're very dexterous with their paws, and the animal reaches down into that cylinder, she triggers the triggers, and then it's that down in the cylinder, it closes that foot down below. So some have pull triggers, some have push triggers, some have pull and push trigger. I was questioning too. So, why it's just a pull and not a push also. Did I explain that? Yeah, no, I forgot to bring one. They mainly use, they're very good. Again, they catch crews very readily. They might catch a skunk with a possum, but a dog or a cat, dogs and cats they don't normally do that with their paws. That's not how they operate. So they're very good as far as avoiding any domestic or non-target animal, like a fish or a fox. Canines won't be caught in those traps. Go back to the push pull, just, I'm not overly familiar with those, but I don't know how many are just pull only, but. I don't know how many are pull only. I know a lot, we'll call ABC trappers, nuisance trappers, use those a lot.
Yeah.
And probably more than the other, but they're very handy if you want to catch a lot of food. But. So what's,
So in a conversation, I'm not sure whether this came through the testing process, but in a conversation that I had with the author of the journal article, he said push triggers, in very, very rare instances, they've had situations where a dog or even maybe a bear would stick their tongue in, and with a push trigger, they caught. So he recommended a pull trigger.
I think that'd be quite rare. Yeah.
Very rare, very rare.
It might take those straps out of a lot of them right out of their equation. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many of the dogless traps are pushing forward, and whether that means those options very greatly.
Well, yeah.
It would seem to me that adding that have the full trigger could disenfranchise a lot of people that may have trigger traps already. And I'm not sure if it's clear enough reason to add it.
All right, so we could go down to D and E. F. The spread and the downward pressure adjustable for pan tension in D and E was not changed. We did recommend deleting the drag trap because it has not been tested. Obviously, that's up to the board, so we'll, I think our rationale is that we just couldn't point to a BMP study or, information about the drug. We felt that it wasn't necessarily consistent with the legislative directive.
Okay, so there's a lot of things in our B&B. Just mentioned one about a shorter chain link, saying it's not being approved one way or the other. That's another example. Everything is a B&B. It may never be. It's not practical for everything necessary for every little detail in driving the B&B approved.
Is that a commonly used method of securing the dropping with a drag versus a like in the ground?
It's only, it's effective in certain situations, not. It's been around forever.
They're used in heavily wooded and brushy areas. I did bring an example of that, a trap. If you're trapping coyotes in open field, you're not gonna use the drag. It's gotta be a place where animal.
We can catch.
It gets them out of sight sometimes, and it gets them out of the sun, I mean, it gets away from the set on the. It's common for certain situations, but most traps are staked, I would say.
All right, so, any questions? No. All right, so,
I do.
yep,
But it's not enough. If you're saying a foothold trap is triggered by downward pressure, it must be adjustable and tension. Isn't it? The one right before that says it has to have a full trigger. It's
Two different traps, two different kinds of.
I understand, they don't specify.
Yeah.
The foot trigger is only a trap that's only attached to a foot, correct?
right,
So they have to reach down into it.
I understand that how
Yeah.
traps work.
Oh, but that's what, I think that's the only type of saying need to pull back trigger is the type of tool you have.
correct. That's the way it's written.
Yeah, 425. But it is kind of. Yeah, it says a foothold trap. Well, it does say fully encapsulate the foot in full trigger. I'm just saying, it sounds kind of. I'm fine with it because I understand how it works, but it just seems contradictory. And if we're trying to please everybody, well. good luck with that.
Oh, there's no way.
Oh,
that's
whenever
gonna
we please
happen.
everybody.
So under 4.6, there were some changes. The department's recommendation is no body gripping trap shall be set on land unless it is under 25 square inches or it is over 25 square inches and less than 60 square inches, and it is either set 5 feet above the ground or it is in an anchored enclosure with openings no greater than 60 square inches and a trigger trap that is recessed at least 12 inches from the openings. And any body gripping traps over 60 square inches shall only be set in the water. And if you scroll down a little bit, we did recommend deleting 4.6, 4.7, and 4.8. And we also sort of combined the meat-based body gripping or the meat-based bait requirement so that into one, basically saying that all meat-based bait shall be covered at the time the trap is set. And here I would ask for staff to explain those differences.
Do you have examples of these? Types of trap?
I do, I have the sizes. Yes,
I would.
we're talking body grips here. I have the sizes that are relevant to those square inches.
I think I would find it at this point that we're getting into stuff that visual would be beneficial. And this may be a good time to break and do that. Personally, I think this is. Kind of like Chinese restaurant.
All right, well, pizza's here, so why don't we take a break, grab the traps. And back in.
Yeah.
All right, we're back here at 6:45.
You could bring breakfast too.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, hold on. And I do believe recording is still on.
Hold on. Okay, Michelle?